Where did football begin? Where did football begin? Football has been played throughout the world for thousands of years. Greeks, Romans, Japanese.
The Romans and the Greeks thousands of years ago, but also in Japan there was a game called Kamari with two teams of three and a ball that's kicked with the feet. In China, 1,000 years ago, called Suchu. South America and Mexico, there was a game called Talachi. Indonesia and Malaysia, they still played a game called Bolo Takraw or Sepak Takraw. That involves, you can see that, this wicker ball. In England and Scotland there were games played on the street, and some of these games are still played today. This ball, smaller ball, is a handball that's played in Scotland on the streets of a town called Jedburgh.
England did not invent football. They gave it rules.
Also at university, when they went to university, there were football clubs that played to their own rules. There was something called the Cambridge Rules. Have you heard of Cambridge University? It's famous. They had their own rules of football in the early 1800s. And that takes us to this book, which is, if you can see that, this is probably the most important book in football, association football, because it outlines, it's a minute book of the Football Association of London. The clubs represented at this meeting should form themselves into an association to be called the Football Association. So this is the very first time that they were going to write down the laws of this particular kind of football.
Into the colleges and the schools in London, but strictly amateur. No pagado, no money, no dinero.
At first, association football was limited to London, only a few clubs. But after about 10 years, it takes us to 1871, the Football Association decided to have a knockout cup competition, which they call the FA Cup, which still exists today in England, as you realise. But the other thing this FA Cup did was to make the sport more popular. People in the Midlands of Britain and the north of Britain wanted to play this game, so they started forming more clubs. Now, at first, they were only the wealthy people, but soon the working class people joined clubs. And the FA Cup started 10 years later by attracting some other teams from the north of England. And it's in the 1880s, this snowballed, it increased, and more clubs forming in the Midlands and the North, consisting mainly of working class, not aristocratic.
Not the rich, the poor. Organised football and brought it from London up to the north of England. And from the north and the Midlands, they spread that game throughout the world. Britain, a major world power. Victorian Britain, bigger empire than the Romans ever had. They conquered a third of the world, not by war but by trade. Everywhere around the world, the Brits went to build railways, bridges, canals. And those people took the game of football throughout the world. In America, South America, Asia, Canada, Europe.
Obviously, Britain was trading with the world. Sailing ships were travelling all over the world, including South America. And in the 1860s and 1870s, ships would call in the harbour, and the local people would see the English playing a game of football on the harbour side. And at first, they just perhaps watch the game, but eventually they might actually join in and play an impromptu sort of game of football. Actually, they might even think about forming a team.
The Royal Navy was out on the Pacific coast for one reason and one reason only: to protect British interests, to protect British trade, to protect British civilians who were out there working, who had made their homes out there. And it was there purely and simply to make sure that other emerging nations did not interfere with the trade. So the Pacific Fleet would sail up and down the coast from Tierra del Fuego on the bottom up to the Panama Canal, or what would have been the Panama Canal, because it didn't open until, 1913, did it? But that whole stretch of coast was actually the territory of the British Pacific Fleet, and ships were sent out there to patrol, to make sure that nobody interfered with British interests. And they tended to be based on one particular place, like Valparaiso. But their purpose there, to protect the British Empire.
Football was recognised in South America, and people who were working in South America, there were British engineers building railways, factories, people being educated in Britain, going out to countries like Brazil, Uruguay and Chile. There'd be quite a big expatriate group within those, in the large cities, of English people. They'd take out, bring a football back from Britain with them and get playing, first of all playing with their friends, forming clubs in each country, playing other English people, but gradually you'll get the local people forming their own clubs.
Socialmente el fútbol a fines del siglo XIX y comienzos del siglo XX fue una eclosión, al menos en nuestro continente, muy importante, porque el fútbol nace en el Río de la Plata, en los colegios británicos, en la clase social alta, porque teníamos una gran inmigración, y entonces esa inmigración inglesa, que era inglesa, eran dueños de los bancos, de los seguros, de las compañías de teléfonos, del teléfono no, pero existía, de las compañías de energía eléctrica, de la compañía de aguas corrientes, del agua, eran dueños absolutamente de todo. Y se juntaban con las clases, la clase patricia uruguaya, que iban a colegios muy buenos y vivían en las mismas zonas que eran el centro de la ciudad, allá en la ciudad que hoy se llama la Ciudad Vieja. Allí eran donde vivían en aquel tiempo los ricos y los ingleses adinerados. Lo toma el pueblo, lo populariza y comienzan a producirse expresiones de pasión impresionantes que no las logró ni el cricket, que es el primer deporte inglés, ni el rugby, que es el segundo deporte inglés, ni el remo segundo y el rugby el tercero.